Alright, Miss Black's class, this is Miss Reeves, and I'm going to do a video for you for the notes for today, so please follow along as best you can, and if Miss Hemby needs to pause the video, ask her to do that. I'll try to go slow so that you have time to copy the notes down. So hopefully she has passed out your notes paper for today, your foldable, and it should look like the picture on the screen. You're going to cut the strip at the bottom off so that you have a square, and then you're going to fold that square in so that the corners go into the center, and I'll show you a picture of that in just a second. So these four equations are going to be on the inside. This is what it should look like whenever you have it folded together. We're going to have four different types of problems that we're going to work. We're going to be factoring trinomials, and we're also going to be practicing solving those trinomials. Okay, so we're going to open up the first flap that has x squared plus bx plus c on the outside, and on the inside you should see x squared plus 9x plus 20. Okay, so we're going to factor this trinomial, and I'm going to show you the technique that I use to factor. So it's kind of like we are unfoiling. So we're going to set up two sets of parentheses. A trinomial is going to factor into two binomials. So we're going to go ahead and set up our two sets of parentheses. And the first thing that we would want to know is what two things multiply to get x squared. Well, you should know that x times x equals x squared. So that's going to go in those first two positions of your parentheses. Okay, to find out what's going to go in the other two sets of parentheses, we're going to draw a little x over here to the side. Okay, and we're going to look at that very last number of our trinomial, which is 20 in this case, and the middle term of our trinomial is 9. So we're looking at 20 and 9. And what I want to know is I need two numbers that multiply to get 20 and add to get 9. So two numbers that multiply to get 20 and add to get 9. So it turns out that the two numbers that would multiply to get 20 and add to get 9 would be 5 and 4. 5 times 4 is 20. 5 plus 4 is 9. So 5 and 4 are the factors that are going to go in our parenthesis over here. So we're going to put plus 5 plus 4. So if I was to FOIL or box these two binomials together, I would go back to the trinomial or the problem that we started with. But when we're factoring, our goal is to solve the equation. So now that we've factored this, we're going to solve this equation. So remember from yesterday that if you have two things multiplied together and those two things equal 0, then you can separate those two factors and set each of them equal to 0. So I can write x plus 5 equals 0 and x plus 4 equals 0, and I can solve those two equations. Okay, so if I solve these two equations, I'm trying to get x by itself. So I'm going to subtract 5 on the first equation. So that means that x is going to equal negative 5. Same thing for the second equation. We're going to subtract 4 on both sides. So x is going to equal negative 4. So negative 5 and negative 4 are the two solutions to this quadratic equation if we were going to solve it. Sometimes they're just going to ask you to factor, and you would stop with the two sets of parentheses. If it asks you to solve, then you set those parentheses equal to 0, and you find out what x equals. Okay, so that's how it works when everything is positive. Everything in the parentheses will wind up being positive numbers as well. Okay, so now we're going to go to the next flap that on the outside has x squared minus bx plus c. If you open that flap up, you should have x squared minus 8x plus 12. We're going to start this problem the same way. We're always going to set up our two sets of parentheses to start with. And we always look at our first term and see what multiplies to get x squared. Well, in all of these cases, it's going to be x and x first to get x squared. Okay, then we're going to do the same thing we did a while ago. We're going to draw an x out to the side. And I'm going to look at the very last number, which is 12, and the middle number, which is -8. So again, this time I'm trying to find two numbers that multiply to equal 12 and that add to get -8. So I'm looking for factors of 12 that will add to equal -8. And since they're multiplying to equal a positive number but adding to equal a negative number, then both of my numbers are going to need to be negative. Okay, so if I think about things that multiply to get 12 and add to get 8, that would be 6 and 2. So -6 and -2 are the factors that we're going to use. So in my parenthesis, I write x minus 6, x minus 2. So if the problem just asked to factor, we would stop right there, and that's our answer. If the problem asks us to solve, then we're going to go from there. We set the equation equal to 0, and we set each factor equal to 0 to solve. So x minus 6 equals 0, and x minus 2 equals 0. So we're going to solve both of these equations. I'm going to add 6 to both sides. So the first equation, x is going to equal +6. The second equation, I'm going to add 2 to both sides. So x is going to equal +2. So +6 and +2 would be the solutions. Okay, the next flap says x squared plus bx minus c. And so inside has x squared plus 2x minus 15. So we're going to start the same way again. We're going to set up our two sets of parentheses. Again, we always look to see what two things multiply to get x squared. It's going to be x and x. I'm going to go over to the side and draw my x. This time I'm looking to see what multiplies to get -15. So what multiplies to get -15. And this time we need them to subtract to equal +2. In order for two numbers to multiply to get -15, one is going to have to be negative and one is going to have to be positive. So I need one negative number, one positive number, that when you multiply them, they get -15, but when you add or subtract them, they get +2. So if I'm going to get a positive answer, then the bigger number has to be positive. So I know 5 times 3 is 15. So I'm going to want the 5 to be positive and the 3 to be negative. So a -3 times a +5 is -15, but -3 plus 5 is a +2. So back in my parenthesis, I'm going to write x minus 3, x plus 5. So those are the factors. If it asks to factor, we would stop there. If the problem asks to solve, then you set each of those parentheses equal to 0. So x minus 3 equals 0, x plus 5 equals 0. And now we're going to solve those two equations. So I would add 3. So x equals +3. For the other one, I would subtract 5. So x equals -5 and x equals +3 are the solutions to this example. Okay, this is the last example. We have x squared minus bx minus c, And the example is x squared minus 7x minus 18. So we're still going to set up our two sets of parentheses to start. And the two terms that multiply to get x squared will be x and x. I'm going to put my x over to the side. This time I'm looking for a number that multiplies to get negative 18. Multiplies to get negative 18. And this time subtracts to get negative 7. So multiplies to get negative 18, subtracts to get negative 7. So again, because it's multiplying to equal a negative number, one has to be negative and one has to be positive, okay? And this time, since what I'm trying to add or subtract to is a negative number, then my bigger number needs to be negative this time. So two numbers that multiply to get 18 would be 9 and 2. And a negative 9 plus 2 equals negative 7. So x minus 9, x plus 2 are my factors. If they ask me to solve, then I'm going to set those factors equal to 0 again. So x minus 9 equals 0, x plus 2 equals 0. So I'm going to add 9 to both sides. X will equal positive 9. For the other equation, I'm going to subtract 2, so x will equal a negative 2. So positive 9 and negative 2 are the solutions. Okay, so you're going to make sure you pay attention on your homework paper because some of the problems will ask you just to factor. The top half is just factoring, so you would stop with what you have in parentheses. And then the bottom half you're solving, so you're going to factor, then set them equal to 0 and solve. Do the best you can. Start on your homework. And if you have questions, you can come by and see me during tutorials, or I will be here after school for Math Lab and you can come in for help.